The early 2000s were different for us all. Some of us were finishing high school. Some were happy that the Y2K problem was overblown. And all of us could see that Paris Hilton was everywhere. She had reality shows, a #1 hit single, merchandise, movie roles, you name it, Paris had it. She capitalized, and some would say originated, the role of celebutante, and critics called her famous for being famous. In her new YouTube documentary, This Is Paris, we're introduced to a different, less seen side of the party girl heiress we've all come to know as she dives deep into her claims of abuse she endured while attending boarding school at age 16. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm on the couch. All right, this is Ronald, and I am on the couch after watching This Is Paris. This is Paris, which is a documentary that is available on YouTube, starring Paris Hilton, Kathy Hilton, Nicky Hilton Rothschild, Kim Kardashian West, and Kyle Richards, directed by Alexandra Dean, and written by Alexandra Dean. All right, so This is Paris. This is a documentary that talks about Paris Hilton. And at the top of the show, we kind of talked about a little bit about the rise of Paris and where everybody remembers Paris Hilton from. The way I experienced Paris Hilton was there was a lot of her in the early 2000s, and then it felt like I never heard from her again. And I knew she was still around. Every now and then I'd hear a headline, Paris is doing something, Paris released something, Paris is a DJ now, all of that. And this documentary does a very good job of bridging the gap from when we were seeing Paris Hilton all the time to when we were starting to see less of Paris Hilton, and why is that? And she kind of covers it with one line by saying, I didn't really want to be a reality TV star. I wanted to focus on my businesses. And I mean, by all accounts, she was successful in making that transition. So we all know Paris from The Simple Life with Paris and Nicole, and before that she was kind of an heiress and famous for being famous. I use the word celebutante, found that on Wikipedia, but I think that's really good. What we have to remember is that Paris is really the original celebutante. Like, she's kind of patient zero when it comes to the idea of being famous for being famous and the idea of being a celebrity just for being a celebrity. You know, like I always think about the quote that Melissa Ford said, which was, there was a time when fame was a byproduct of success, meaning that you'd be really successful at something and then fame would also come. But she says that's not necessarily the case anymore. And this crop of celebrity kind of proves that. And that was Paris Hilton, Kim Kardashian, and they're probably the two most notable ones, but there's most certainly others that then, you know, kind of smile their way into the camera and then find other things to do once they're there, whether it be business or using their skills as an influencer. But Paris Hilton was the original influencer. She was the first. She was the first one that people were sending clothes to because they knew if Paris took a picture in your clothes, everyone was going to be wanting to wear those clothes. And Paris says that. She even says in this documentary, people say I'm the original influencer, but sometimes I feel like I created a monster. Now, that is probably one of my arguments that against this being a good documentary, which is that they don't really unpack that the way they should, because you could have done a whole documentary based around the rise of Paris Hilton, Kim Kardashian West coming after, and all the Kardashians that come with her. You could make a whole documentary just about that, and how the age of the influencer and what they look like, how they take their pictures, how they look in the camera, all of that, and how this was all originated by Paris Hilton. And I'm sure there's somebody that came before Paris that wasn't quite doing what Paris is doing, but maybe walked in the same vein as Paris. But to say that what we have on Instagram right now, which is a bunch of people who are just very attractive that are selling you clothes or selling you makeup or selling you lip liner, that's all stuff that came from that era. And that's fascinating to me, but they don't really go into it. And the reason why they don't is because they spend this documentary is about an hour and 46 minutes long. And they spend about an hour of it just talking about Paris's childhood, even interactions between her and her sister. In my opinion, I don't think this is a well done documentary. But that being said, it really humanizes Paris. And it's not because of the way that they're editing it or the way they put the story together, but it's the things that they leave in there and let her interact with herself, the thing that she's saying. And then when you see that she's kind of dropping the facade. Now, I say kind of dropping the facade because I don't know Paris Hilton. I don't know how she actually is. All I know is that watching this, there was a few times where I was like, that looks like a real person, where there's even the way she react to something or say something that it like felt very much like a real person. Now, this is 2020. So I feel like the idea of somebody being a capitalist or having all this money and being able to do whatever they want with it, at some parts, I felt like maybe she doesn't deserve sympathy or understanding or any sort of relatability. But there's times where I'm sitting here watching this very rich woman. I think her net worth is $300 million. But there's times I'm sitting here watching this very rich woman just seem like the rest of us. And I think that was probably the only time that I had an inkling of thought of thinking of celebrities and rich folks as normal people with a lot of money. But then again, having the money and the wealth obviously skews their perspective. But that being said, when you get to the heart of this documentary or the real point of the documentary, it really, for me, I think that the theme of this is that no one is immune to trauma. So I think this is hamstrung because they put it in the last 30 minutes and they're kind of start alluding to it, that Paris is growing up and, and this is all stuff that's in the news. So I'm not spoiling anything by just telling you what's in the documentary. You could still watch it. But in the last 30 minutes, they kind of go into, and they've been building it to the whole thing. So they're talking about Paris's life. They're talking about where she was the reality star until the transition to businesswoman and then DJ. And she even talks a little bit about that. We even go with her on a DJ set. That's interesting. And at one point, they kind of allude to the fact that when Paris was a teenager, she was kind of wilding out. She had a fake ID. She was using that to get into clubs. She was going out, partying, doing all this thing. Her parents were trying to get a control of her. So they sent her to a couple of like adult, like a teenage attitude, emotional camps or whatever. So they took them to all these different camps, outdoor adventure programs and stuff and stuff where it's kind of like those, you remember when we used to watch Jenny Jones and Ricky Lake and all that stuff, and they'd have the bad kids and they send them to boot camp. It's like that. That's where they would send them out. So Paris would go to these places, but she would break out. She'd run away. Every single one of them she ran away from until they sent her to one in particular. And that was the Provo school. I believe it's in Utah, which this was the worst one. She suffered a lot of abuse. There's actually more stories about the Provo school that are out. So she suffered a lot of abuse, mistreatment and all this from folks. And what she describes is, and I just didn't think they did a good enough job of really cracking that shell, because again, and I don't know if there's footage we haven't seen or footage she didn't let be in the documentary, but they just at one point, she says, this is all a facade. What I'm doing out here, how I'm talking to y'all, all that, it's a facade. And your first instinct would be like, of course it's a facade, because this is what rich people do. This is what celebrities do. They don't ever show you their real face. But then she says, this is all a facade because I'm still traumatized by what happened to me at Provo school. And at that point, I was like, okay, Okay, so that, and I had to sit there, and when I say relatability is because this is the same thing that survivors of abuse talk about, is putting up a facade and having to put on a veneer or shield or all of that. But the only difference between like the average survivor who doesn't have money or access is that Paris has all this money or access. She can retreat into the shell of a person that we see in front of us. That's like, you know, taking pictures and doing the vacant stare into the camera and all that stuff. So when I think about all that, and then I think about the fact that she's also the original influencer, and then I think about the army of influencers who all do this vacant stare and put forth this life on social media, I feel like that's what should have been echoed in this documentary, and it wasn't. And maybe this documentary needed to be longer or multiple parts, but to not go there and to kind of just leave it as a story just kind of like centered around Paris Hilton, which, and to be honest with you, by the end of this, you're going to see Paris Hilton in a different light. If you didn't like her, you'll probably be like, oh, okay, she's all right. If you're like me and you were indifferent at the end of this, I was like, she seems fine. She seems smart. She seems like she did some work to earn, the money that she got. I mean, she started on third base, but she like didn't squander that living, used it to like move herself up. So I'm not really mad at that, but the opportunity that they had to make a documentary that was compelling about the state that we're in right now when it comes to influencing, popularity, and social media. And they didn't, it was like a footnote, if anything, in this. And I think that's what bothered me the most about this documentary, which was that it could have been something much better than it was. And I think maybe they were hamstrung by the fact that they had to center it around Paris Hilton. But watching this, I just sat there and I was like, man, you guys really could have gone deep into this, and you didn't. And I'm still waiting for someone to really, because I'm saying if Paris Hilton is the Rosetta Stone when it comes to influencers, then I want somebody to tell me that story right now. Like, or at least let's have that discussion right now and talk about what influencers are. And I only say this because, again, when we talk about no one being immune to trauma, then seeing Paris Hilton, who then in like 2019 is coming out and doing this campaign to take down these schools so they could stop all this abuse at these places. It seems, and she says all these years, it's just, I've been just like trying, you know, I barely sleep at night because I'm still traumatized by the way they took me out of the house to this camp, what they did there, putting me in solitary confinement. I'm still traumatized by all that. And so it makes me go back to all of her interactions. And they talk about the fact that she's been in multiple abusive relationships. And they talked about like the choices that she makes in partners and all that. And you sit here and you look at it and it just reframes all of that in a way that, I mean, it's difficult to really articulate how meaningful that was to see that and to understand it in a way that I would have never understood it not for a rich person or for a celebrity, unless you told me. And I guess that I'm struggling with that because with people who are not celebrities or not rich, I guess you look at them and there's a realness that comes with them. But again, if they were a survivor of some sort of abuse or some sort of, if they suffered some sort of abuse, then there's things that sometimes you hear survivors tell you, this happened to me, and as a result, I don't do this anymore, or I have problems with this, or I don't like this, or I don't really want to deal with this, you know, and it manifests differently. But watching this rich person and watching the way it manifests with her, it's just completely different. I want to be clear. I'm not saying that every single thing she did was as a result of the abuse that she suffered at Provo. But what I'm saying is what she says is that the facade that she puts up was a defense mechanism as a result of the abuse she suffered at Provo, which it blew my mind. In a way that gave me compassion for her and compassion for, you know, abuse victims, survivors of abuse. and a way that just made me wish that they had just dove into this influencer nation thing more, because now I feel like everyone is following after an example of someone who was managing trauma, you know? And I feel like there's something there I can't quite articulate, but there's something there. And yeah, I don't know. I'm a little shook. So, you know what? I'll leave it there. Leaving the Theater is a production of ohitsBigRon Studios. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. To find out more about this show and other ohitsBigRon Studios shows, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ohitsBigRon. That's at ohitsBigRon. If you like this show, check out our sister show, Time Well Spent. Leaving the Theater will be back soon, but until then, I'll be here on the couch.